So I started digital art about a year ago, and here's a self-portrait I made right around when I started, and here's another one I made like a couple weeks ago. And yeah, you can clearly tell one of them is a lot better than the other. And it kind of astounds me when I think about it. Like sometimes when I'm having a bad art feels day, I will look at both of these and just, bask in my improvement because we do love self-growth. But it's not just kind of the quality that makes me really happy to see, but also I've gotten a lot better at speed. I think the old one took me like days of work, maybe like a week or so, but this one took me like an hour to do, if that. And I did not really think that that would be possible for me when I first started out. So I just wanted to kind of take some time and document like some tips and just other things that I've kind of learned over this year of doing digital art. And hopefully, maybe in another year of digital art, I can look back and add to this kind of backlog of things that I've learned. So yeah, let's get into it. I think the first thing I learned was that learning anatomy is key for confidence, even if I don't use it a lot. So when I first started, I think I would avoid drawing people or like fun poses because I was afraid they would be bad, and they were bad because I was just starting out. But I kind of hated looking at any of that work and seeing how like awkward and stiff it was, but that prevented me from like practicing and actually making work to get better because I was too afraid of not being good at it. So what ended up happening was I watched a bunch of YouTube videos. I think I even took like a class on Skillshare or something, but I basically learned a bunch of like anatomy fundamentals and like learned about like the main parts of the form and how to draw them at different angles. And like right now, I don't fully use all of that 100% of the time. Like my work isn't really focused on precision perfect anatomy, but learning all of that gave me a lot of confidence, and it like got me over that initial hump of not wanting to do any of my work, and it just made me feel a lot more fluid and put my mind at ease when I was drawing people. So I highly recommend anyone who like feels like their poses are stiff or anything to just learn some anatomy fundamentals, even if you don't end up using all of it, because it will do wonders for your confidence. So the next thing I had to learn, and this took me a while to get, was that I should call things finished even if they aren't finished. So like I'm the type of person who, if I'm allowed, will spend forever tweaking little details and like trying to get everything perfect. Like especially in a digital medium when you can like hit undo or add another layer or just keep making adjustments continually forever. But I learned at some point I just have to call something done. And even if there are parts of it that I don't like, I should just note them in my mind or even like write them down somewhere and make it better in the next piece that I make. I think this tip kind of distills down to the idea like work fast and iterate on your work. So I think that specifically was really key for me getting better at art. I think there was this story in this book called Art and Fear, which is a really good book. I recommend people read it. But they talked about this story about a pottery class where they split the class into two groups, and one group was making as many pots as they could, and they had another group focusing on only making like a few pots but make them like the best quality they could. So they had one group focusing on quantity and one group focusing on quality. They had them make a bunch of pots in whatever time frame, and they actually figured out that the quantity group produced higher quality results than the quality group. What happened was that the group that was just making as many pots as possible, because they were just making a bunch of work very quickly, they learned what worked and learned what didn't. And at the end of the whole exercise, they were able to make these really nice pieces of work because they had done a bunch of iteration. And the other group, because they were focused on making the best quality pots, they ended up kind of getting in their own head and focusing too much on the details and weren't able to produce something as good. And, when I read that, I was like, oh, I'm being called out by this book. And honestly, it kind of reminds me of like evolution and survival of the fittest. Like if every piece you make is like a generation or whatever, in each generation, the techniques and the skills that are the most useful to you, that feel the best, will end up surviving, and you'll end up losing some of the ones that don't work. So just if you iterate over time, your work will just naturally get better because you've been doing so much of it. So yeah, like the key there is to just call things finished and move on so that you can work fast and iterate. And this next tip actually ties into the previous one really closely, and it's basically practice in all caps. Every artist online will say this because it's just fundamentally true. And I know that sometimes it's like hard because of school or work or whatever other responsibilities, or maybe you're just tired and not feeling it that way. And that's fine. Like, don't make yourself guilty over not practicing enough, but as much as you can, I would say practice to make your art better. And I will say that I tend to find like different flavors of practice in a way more useful than others. Like sometimes I practice techniques, or sometimes I practice style, or I practice just like idea generation or whatever. And maybe if people are interested, I can make another video delving into like the different forms of practice I find useful. But the bottom line is just make stuff as much as you can, even if it's like self-indulgent fan art, which I make a lot of and was kind of one of the things that helped me a lot because I would practice a lot because I want to make fan art of my fun anime boys. And yeah, it was kind of cringe, but like it got me a lot better at art. So like it was worth it to be cringe for a bit. So yeah, if it's like fan art, if it's like small sketches, if it's studies, whatever it is you want to practice, just do it. Don't worry about it being perfect. Just do it. I think if you want specifics, what practice does is it kind of like strengthens all like the muscles and brain connections that you need to make art. So like the connections between your eyes and your hands. So like when you see something and want to translate it onto your work, you need like the brain pathways to make that a fluid process. When you have an imaginative idea and you want to put it on the page, you need like the brain pathways and muscles to do that, and practicing actively strengthens those over time. And the more you do it, the faster you get at it. And like, of course, everyone knows this. I'm like beating a dead horse, but yeah, practice in all caps. Moving on from that, I think another big tip that I had to learn and internalize over time was that your style will secretly develop over time, so don't stress about it. So I think, as is common for me, I was very anxious when I started digital art because I was worried about having a cohesive style, whatever that means. Like I wanted to have like a good process and like have a way of working and a style that was consistent and good, which is what I saw in like a bunch of artists around me online. And I kind of just had to unpack that mentality was not a useful way of looking at my work. And I was creating a bunch of worry for myself for no reason. Like I had to learn that as you practice, you learn little hacks or techniques that you like best, like a specific way of using your layers or a specific brush, or just like tiny details that you use in your own work that feel good to you. You just kind of collect these as you practice more, and over time, these will in totality basically become your style. And it's kind of an unconscious process. Like I do think that there might be a way to like consciously shape your style, and I do want to try it out at some point. And if I do and it ends up going well, maybe I'll talk about it online. But overall, I think the bottom line is that your style will develop over time without you having to put a lot of effort into it. So all you should do is just keep practicing and doing what you like and doing what feels good. And over time, your style will emerge. So don't super worry about it. Okay, so the next thing, we are going from super broad and lofty to like hyper specific right now. But like one tip I learned that I really want to document is that there are different kinds of shadows and they look different. So I'm going to bring up my self-portrait again, the good one. And basically, I want to talk about like the different shadows that are present here. So if you look near my chest or my face, there are these things called form shadows, which as my understanding has it, these are kind of the shadows that are made when light is curving around a 3D object. Like if you imagine like a sphere lit by a single light source, all of the shadows are kind of soft edged and they transition very smoothly. These are like form shadows. And if you have like organic forms and a light that's hitting a certain way, a lot of these forms are going to be soft edged. The next type of shadow are cast shadows. And if you look at like the folds in the clothes, these are what cast shadows are. These are basically what we think of when we think of a shadow, which is where an object is blocking light from hitting another object. And because like you have a specific object blocking like a ray of light or whatever, these shadows are going to be more hard edged. And there's kind of like this interplay between form shadows and cast shadows that gives your work a lot more complexity. So the last shadow is something called an occlusion shadow, which is basically a shadow that happens when like two things are really close to each other or like overlapping and light just is not able to get in that space. So it is occluded. And occlusion shadows should be the darkest part of your piece because they're what happen when light can't get somewhere. So it's going to be very dark there. And basically having these three types of shadows, like I said before, brings a lot of complexity to your work. It gives it more depth, it gives it more layers, and it makes it look more naturalistic because this is how lighting works in real life. Maybe like a general tip from this would be like learn lighting, but these are just like specific things you can incorporate into your piece to make your work just a bit more naturalistic and give it a bit more depth. And of course, you can break these rules for stylistic reasons. I might have done that a little in this portrait, but knowing what they are so you can break them purposefully just like kind of elevates your work and brings it to another level. So I highly recommend kind of, if you want to, if that's the style of work you have, try and work in these different types of shadows. And like a lot of this comes from studying lighting in like real life and in like photos and like film and stuff. Like cinematography is actually a really good resource because they are very, very particular in the way they use lighting to like create a mood. So I highly recommend, if you want a general tip, is to just like study lighting and try and figure out what lighting makes your pieces look better. Okay, so my next tip is like slightly tied to the previous one, but it's basically use references in all caps, underlined, bold, in different fonts. Just like using references is incredibly useful. Like I used to be so shameful of using references. Like I don't know what I was thinking. Like there was a voice in my brain going like, no, you have to have the art come out of your mind fully formed perfectly without any external help or you're not valid. And that, of course, not a good way to look at your work. Like literally everyone uses references, professional artists in like industry, animators, like even the old masters. Like I'm pretty sure Da Vinci would like steal dead bodies and hide them in his basement so he could practice anatomy. That might just be a legend though. I don't want to like posthumously slander Da Vinci. So like allegedly Da Vinci would steal dead bodies and use them for reference. So like absolutely use reference. This is again the whole process of like strengthening your mental pathways and your muscles and like the connection between them to make your work better. So like the more you look at reference and then draw from that reference, it kind of increases your visual toolbox and your like artistic brain so that when you go to make something without reference, you have like this whole backlog of things that your brain can draw from and like create patterns and create something new from all the information it has in the past. I mean, the way I'm describing it now is a little bit like machine learning. So if you're training an AI on all of this training data and then you give it a new problem, it can use all of the old training data to construct a new solution to the new problem, even though it's only been studying old data. And like, artificial intelligence is based off of the real intelligence of the human brain. So like use reference, do not be shameful of it. I will say though, like to be careful with attribution. I use unsplash.com because I think most of the images on that website are like free for any use. So those are good to use as references. I tend not to use other people's work as references because some artists just really don't like that. And also because like if you're using someone else's work as a reference, they've already done a lot of like the artistic processing. So it's not as good practice because they've already done a lot of the work for you. Maybe if I see someone who has like really good lighting or like a really good pose, I will like sketch it in my own personal private notebook to see if I can imitate it, but I will never post it anywhere because that's someone else's work. But I will do a lot of, tracing and using of my own images. Like if I take a photo, like I think that second self-portrait was based off of a mirror selfie I took. So if I took the photo, I tend to heavily use those. If it's something I see in real life and I'm allowed to use it, I will use that. Maybe I can make another video about how I use references to work. So yeah, as long as you're being like careful with attribution, references can be like super key. And like, yeah, you saw that first portrait. I didn't use any reference there. That was just like raw from my mind. Like that's what no reference does to a man. Like fully like preventing myself from attaining my full potential by being shameful of reference. So yeah, use reference, all caps. Okay, so all right. So the last tip I have is something kind of obvious, but it's basically that digital art is different from traditional art. So I'm going to be using different tools. So yeah, I think this is pretty common for like traditional artists who are switching over into digital art. I used to be a watercolor painter. I still am. I'll crack open those paints every now and then, but mainly most of my work is digital right now. But I had to kind of shift my mindset because I came into it thinking all of these tools are like wrong or cheating in a way, like tracing or copy pasting or liquefying or using all these layers. Like I don't know, I thought that was wrong in a way, and it's really not. Like digital art is its own medium. Like when you switch from watercolor paint to oil paint, which is something I tried for a bit, I had to use different tools, I had to use different techniques. Like using Turpenoid is not cheating when you're learning about oil paint. So like using all of your digital tools at your disposal is not cheating. And I had to really, internalize that. And it was, again, a matter of like practicing and learning which tools I like and which ones I don't, and like learning the program I'm using. I'm using Krita because it's free and I don't have the money for Photoshop, but like Googling stuff in the Krita documentation and looking up YouTube tutorials is super useful to me. I think the day I Googled Krita clipping group was like the day my art ascended because I felt like I had just unlocked something super cool that would elevate my work. So yeah, Google is your friend, YouTube tutorials are your friend. Just, learn the programs you're using. Don't be weird about using all of your digital tools. Like, use the medium to its fullest extent and it will reward you. All right, those were all of my specific tips I learned over a year of making digital art. I think just to put a nice little bow on it, the main thing I had to learn was not to be super stressed about perfection or doing digital art right, whatever that means. I think, it's really easy for me to compare myself to artists on social media because they're all really good and I want to be just like them. But I just had to, take a deep breath and remind myself to just keep practicing my own work, keep iterating on my process, feeling what's good, what isn't good, actively critiquing my own work and, trying to get better on my own terms instead of, playing the comparison game. And, I think as long as I keep trying new things, paying attention to my work and practicing, over the long arc of my artistic career, I will get better. So yeah, thank you to anyone who listened, especially if you listened all the way through. Like I said, I kind of made this because I want to document my growth in a way, but if other people who are starting out in digital art find this useful, then that would be good. That would make me feel good if I was able to help people out. Maybe in another year I can make another self-portrait and then look back on my old one and critique why it's bad and just, keep documenting my growth. I love self-growth. Half of the reason I love doing art is looking at how my art grows. It's really rewarding to me to see improvement in a skill. So I do really want to keep checking in every now and then, looking at my own art. But for now, I'm just going to keep going forward. I got a lot of things that I want to work on and get better at. I'm by no means content with where I am right now. So I'm going to keep practicing and I really hope you do too. So thank you for watching.